Welcome to Privacy Chats with Rachel and John, a podcast for privacy professionals and enthusiasts alike. I'm Rachel.
And I'm John. So to get things rolling here, Rachel, what are the two certainties in life?
I know this one, the classic death and taxes. Grim adage for sure, but it seems to be pretty timeless.
It is. And your question, I knew that just like you did. I was curious about the source of that, like where did that come from? And I found a blog post that it was from the National Constitution Center, and it attributes that quote to, or the adage, I guess, to Benjamin Franklin, because of something that he wrote in a letter that he wrote in 1789 to some French scientist.
That tracks,
Jean
I think.
Baptiste was the scientist. So
Math Franklin was. He was philosophizing. He was a writer. He was a scientist. He was an inventor and a diplomat. But this episode isn't about my favorite historical polymaths, is it? It's about death and taxes.
Actually, we're not even going to cover death and taxes. We're going to focus on just the death part.
Oh, the worst of the two.
Well, since death is really inevitable from a digital perspective and I guess privacy stuff, what are the preparations that we should be making?
Most of us are walking around with a huge digital shadow, miles long, with no idea what happens when we're gone.
It's true. And, in some ways, I wonder why you're thinking about it so much, because you've got so much time ahead of you. You're on the sunny side of the actuarial tables or something. Anyway, so while thinking about this, I realized recently that there's going to be a huge transition over the next few years or the next generation of how we deal with this. And thinking about it from a comparison perspective, my mother-in-law passed away a few years ago, and her relationship with technology, just to compare it to others, was almost non-existent at all.
I remember you mentioning that when we first started working together, and I'm still so sorry for your loss. She sounded like a wonderful person.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And yeah, Helen was her name. She really was a wonderful person. But she didn't have really any of a digital footprint at all. She never owned a cell phone, let alone a smartphone. She didn't have a computer. She didn't use social media. When she was still, up and about and mobile, she used to go in person to the bank, and then she paid for things when she went to the store with a little envelope of money that she got from the bank that she went. And that's just how she operated. No digital anything.
There is a nice serenity in that, honestly. I sometimes envy the simplicity of that era.
Yeah, I agree. It does sound simple. It's a way of living that really is inconceivable to most people today. That dependency is there, and it's going to become stronger and stronger as time progresses. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm more of the generation that straddled the dawn of this age. When I grew up, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have personal computers. We certainly didn't have any laptops. The internet was invented when I was about 13 years old, according to my research. Mm-hmm. But really, it took decades more for it to become mainstream. So, for all of my childhood, there was no such thing as the internet.
So true. And is this the part where I say, John, you're so old? Haha, jokes.
Yeah, well, I am, but the advantage that I have is that if things were to fall apart and we lose all of the conveniences of these technologies, that my generation, we're just going to be able to fall back on the way things used to be. We have a recollection of how things were without it.
Yeah, and I've wondered how much I would struggle, or how much of my dependency exists on technology because of the tools that have become available to me and have been socially encouraged for me in my generation.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. Hopefully we'll never learn this, but you're really, really smart, and I think you would overcome it.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, but it would be funny for some of us to watch a world full of youths trying to figure out how to get around without turn-by-turn directions being read to them by their smartphones.
For listeners, I think John just snuck in a My Cousin Vinny reference. Again, before my time, I'm acknowledging that right now, but I learned something new every day. So anywho, how does this all tie into preparing for death?
Okay. So we are each day as we live, we're amassing a huge treasure trove of data. And unlike my mother-in-law, who didn't have much of a digital footprint, when we die, we're all going to leave that data behind us. And so what happens to it? Who owns it? What can they do with it? What happens?
Yeah. From time to time, I've been forced to think about this, right? I've had people in my life that have passed, and I've seen fragments of this post-mortem mechanics play out. But in most cases, I wasn't the person managing their digital accounts, the people that passed. So my view is still fragmented. It's one of those things where the pieces don't really come together until you have to be in the thick of it.
Yeah, agreed. And to prepare for this episode, I did some research on that question of what actually happens with our data when we die. And this was just to get me started. And I confirmed that there's really not a single simple answer to the question. I looked at various platforms to see what they had to say about it. So since you and I share a Google Drive for the data and our collaboration.
Mhm.
We use Google Drive for that. I decided to start with Google Drive, and then I used ChatGPT as a more effective Google search to gather some initial data. And I offered it a pretty good summary, it offered me a pretty good summary of the different scenarios and actions that you should probably take with your Google Drive.
Awesome. So let's then start with the simplest scenario. Let's say I am no longer around and I did nothing to prepare for that. Someone's left with it. What happens?
So from this search with ChatGPT about Google Drive, there's three things. So data remains in your account indefinitely. So according to this, Google does not automatically delete accounts based on a user's death. After a prolonged period of inactivity, Google may eventually delete the account, and that's under its inactive account policy. But it typically takes for about 2 years of inactivity on the account for that to kick in. So it's not based
Okay.
on a person being dead. It's based on the account being inactive.
Mhm.
But no one will be able to access your data or your anything in your Google Drive unless they have your login credentials or some sort of a court order. So if you just die and nobody has access to it, they're going to have trouble.
Yeah, it's my data stays in limbo, it sounds like. And unless someone knows my password and gets access to my account, or I guess through a court order, it'll stay that way until Google eats it up after that 2 years. It's kind of bleak, but at the same time expected, especially from a security standpoint.
Yeah. So that's the default. My research shows that Google offers a better option. It's called the Inactive Account Manager, and I had a chance to try it out. It's pretty simple to find, and it's really easy to set up. So basically, you just tell Google what to do if your account becomes inactive for a certain period of time. You can choose who should be notified, what data that person should have access to, and whether or not the account should be deleted afterwards. And while I was trying this out, I actually discovered that my own account recovery account that that I no longer would have access to, or it was set up to an email that I no longer have access to. So
Classic. Yep.
so I could have locked myself out. But anyway, I was able to update that. Um, so I went in and I configured this to give access to my data to my wife in the event that my account becomes inactive. Again, you're not saying it's because I die, it's because your account is inactive.
Right.
And it allowed me to select which data from across all of my Google activities that they should have access to.
It's starting to sound like a checklist of stuff we should all do, right? And I guess for listeners, we'll gladly link to the help pages for specifics, but thanks for giving us the gist. Did anything about your research surprise you as it concerns Google's policy for this and their tools?
Well, overall, it was an easy process, and I give it 2 thumbs up. I noticed that the default behavior for an account to be considered inactive is 2 years. But when I went through the inactive account manager, you can select the amount of time that the account is inactive before it kicks in. But the longest period of time was only 18 months. So it gave me a shorter time period than the default of 2 years, which
Hmm.
I didn't have a problem with, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, that is a little quirky. But okay, Google's covered. What did you look into next?
So social media has a lot of data. So I went there next. So I started with Facebook. I think that's probably the largest social media platform in the world.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Uh,
I've seen memorialized Facebook accounts before, but I've never looked into how it works. So similarly interested as I was with Google.
Yeah, so Facebook calls that process memorialization. And basically, someone else has to report the death and provide some sort of proof, a death certificate or an obituary or something. And once the account is memorialized, the word remembering appears next to the person's name. No one can log into the account, but the posts and photos that were already there stay visible, and they observe the original privacy settings that the person set up, I guess, before they died.
Mm.
The profile won't show up with things like birthday reminders or people you may know, but friends can post tributes if you've enabled that feature. So
That is a thoughtful approach in theory, but what if no one reports the account?
yeah, it's a good question. I was kind of curious about that. So I looked into an account for a friend of mine who passed away from breast cancer in 2022. And I was actually going to speak a little bit about her because she was also a very, very wonderful person. But
Yeah.
I'm actually not going to mention her name because I don't know I don't want this to be taken as I'm reporting that she's passed away.
Mm.
But she was the most wonderful person in the world. She's sorely missed. I just had lunch with her husband last week. But anyway, her Facebook account is still up and is not listed with the remembering next to it. So it's not a memorialized account. And, interestingly, it would have been her birthday just a few weeks ago. And there were a lot of, happy heavenly birthday wishes from many people who remember her and miss her and remembered her on her birthday. So
That's heartbreaking and beautiful. And I think someone is cutting onions on this side of the podcast, but go
yeah,
on.
I know. Sorry for bringing us down. But anyway, according to my research, Facebook does not currently have a policy of disabling or deleting accounts based on periods of inactivity. So, for her account, it's just going to remain like that indefinitely. And I did have a brief conversation with her husband about it. And, he knows that her account is not a memorialized account and it's just there as if she was still around. But all of her friends know that, and he
Yeah.
has access to it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good as a kind of a backup workaround solution. But does Facebook offer any tools to plan ahead, as it sounds like Google kind of does in a way?
So I'm going to say maybe. According to my research, they have something called a legacy contact, and it lets you choose someone to manage parts of your memorialized profile. The legacy contact can write a pinned post. They can update the profile or the cover photo, respond to new friend requests, and request the account's deletion. But they can't log in. They can't read messages that are sent to the account, and they can't delete existing content.
So it seems to offer some control, but it's a little limited.
Yeah, and even the information that I got from ChatGPT doesn't indicate that the person that you designate can have any meaningful control over the data that's in it.
Right. The legacy contact could handle the presentation of your profile, it sounds like, but not the contents.
Yeah, that's the way it seems. And I wanted to try this out also, like I did with the Google thing. And I designated Colleen as my legacy contact. That was my intent anyway. But I got lost in what I would call a confusing maze of account center and privacy settings. I really couldn't find where it was. Frankly, I was impressed that ChatGPT was able to find it and tell me about it. The closest that I got was I reached an option where it looked like I could memorialize myself. And,
Oh,
it seemed like I was treading very close to announcing my own death. So I just stopped. I didn't want to do that.
oh, I could not imagine finding your accidental memorialization as a friend on Facebook. That'd be insane.
Yeah, it would be. So for me, Facebook gets a hard fail here. It's a confusing setup. There's unclear permissions, no easy path for designating legacy control. And the other thing I'm concerned about is Facebook. It seems they take action regardless of who they receive the memorialization request from. It does not rely on receiving requests from like an authorized designee, like an estate or an executor. So, and to as an example of that, I found the form on Facebook that anyone can use to report an account for memorialization. And while the form itself recommends contacting the person's family, it doesn't require it. And I'm going to read you from the form, part of the form. It says, if you're not a family member or close friend of the person who has passed away, we recommend contacting the person's family before requesting memorialization. So,
Hmm. Seems like a poor experience for many angles, especially since memorializing an account seems to prevent login. You could theoretically log people out intentionally with the right paperwork, right?
yeah, agreed. On the flip side, if no legacy contact was set up, like in the case of the late friend's account, the data just sits there indefinitely. And I assumed that they would have to abide by the privacy settings that the owner of the account had set. But honestly, I don't know what legal protections there are for data that doesn't have a living owner. Like there's
Yeah.
nobody who owns the data. So
It makes me think going beyond Facebook here, what are the responsibilities of social media platforms for data that remains in those platforms' possession after the death of the owners of the account, especially when they don't allow a designee to export or delete the data?
yeah, it's a really interesting legal question, and to try and get to the bottom of that, I found a 2022 article. It was published by the Contra Costa County Bar Association,
Say that
which is
10
a
times
county.
fast.
I know, yeah. I had to look at a map and see where is this place. Evidently, it's close to the San Francisco Bay Area, so I've actually been there. But to summarize, their answer was, unless you plan ahead, you're stuck with whatever the terms of service say, and those change constantly. So if you're dead, you're not in a good position to read changes to the terms of service, to agree
Yeah,
to them or object to them.
I had that thought as soon as you said terms of service. I'm like, man, we don't read those when we're alive, generally speaking.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's also important to point out that the terms of service are written to favor the platforms. They don't write
Yep.
those to help you. Um, they protect the digital platforms, not your legacy. And that becomes a real problem when those accounts hold value. So like there's contents, photos, there's potential revenue.
Yeah.
Like if something that you and I created it went viral, there could be a lot of money there. So
Yeah. And I know we have a partnership agreement, so there's clarity if something happened to either of us
mhm.
individually. But if you're an individual creator, not you, but generally, it sounds like it's critical to have a plan for digital assets that do generate income. So I wonder how individual creators would protect their assets in this case.
Yeah, so I think I have a couple of answers to that. The
Hmm.
first one is from that same article from that Contra Costa County Bar Association. And it recommends that people should have an estate plan in place. And it specifically recommends using a trust for digital assets.
Hmm.
In California, it cited a law, the RUFADAA law,
Rufata?
which lets
Weird.
have you yeah
No.
lets you assign someone access to your accounts. You can give broad or limited permission, like letting them download photos and close accounts and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
But
Um,
that's California law, right? And just using us as an example, you're in Maryland, I'm in Arizona, and most tech companies are based in Delaware. So do these principles still apply, or what's the nuance there?
yeah, that might be getting deeper into the law than that I'm actually willing to express an opinion on.
Yeah,
It's
respectable.
also, I think, complicated by the fact that a lot of these companies are, incorporated in other places. Like I think the state of Delaware, where I'm
Yep.
actually at right now, is popular for that, regardless of where their headquarters are. So my recommendation is that you should discuss estate planning with an attorney in your state of legal residence.
Yeah, love the honesty, especially again if these are income generating digital assets. What was your second recommendation earlier?
Yeah, my other recommendation recognizes that we all have digital assets and data that are spread across many, many platforms. So, we started off talking about Google and then Facebook, but what about your LinkedIn account or the data on your Ring camera or
Mhm.
your Apple account or your fitness app or, the list goes on and on. So instead of researching all of the different platforms, my recommendation is to provide access to all of your platforms to whoever is going to be left holding the bag when your time comes to an end. And this can be done quite easily if you centralize your logins to some sort of a password manager or password vault.
Yeah, the simplicity of that as a solution is quite a relief. And I'll take the advice to mean the platforms, the apps that I have the most personalized maybe value on, because I know for a fact people in my age group have at least 5 to 6 social media accounts of some kind, and all of us have about, I don't know, north of 200 logins to maintain on average. So
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned it a number of times here my support of using some sort of a password management app. They provide you a secure way of keeping your passwords, and if you have all of your passwords there, you can either give access to your password locker to someone else. That's what I've done. My wife has the password to my password locker, and I have hers. Or if you don't want to proactively share your passwords, you could create a document that's locked up somewhere as part of your estate planning, and leave the password to your password vault in the document with instructions for your loved ones. Like, this is the
yeah,
music that I want played at my funeral, and here's the password to my password keeper. So
yeah, yeah. Another, I guess, a double click into that advice, but I like the break glass in case of sort of solution you're offering.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That makes sense. And if it helps minimize chaos for the people that'll be dealing with it, why not?
Right. So, I decided to go a little bit farther down this rabbit hole and looked into what happens after death for people's data in their Apple accounts.
Mhm.
And it turns out that Apple has a process that allows you to add up to 5 what they call legacy contacts to your Apple account. And a legacy contact can access your account using an access key that you create when you create them as a legacy contact, and after they have provided a death certificate to Apple, the company.
So it sounds like a way to delegate access, but is it cumbersome or how is it?
Yeah, I thought the same thing at first, but it actually is similar to gaining access to other things. So, for example, when you go to a bank to gain access to a deceased person's assets, it's a fairly routine process, but you do have to provide a death certificate and prove that you are authorized to access the assets.
That makes sense, and that's a great comparison. Any caveats about Apple's process as we've compared Google and Facebook's before?
Yeah, so some interesting big ones that stood out to me. So Apple doesn't allow your legacy contacts to access your purchase. So your music, your books, your movies, or anything in your keychain, like saved passwords or payment information.
So my digital library just dies with me.
So it seems to me, preventing access to payment information seems reasonable. If you need access to a deceased person's credit cards, you really need to go through the credit card company to gain access to that instead of looking to some platform that might have those credit card numbers stored. But I object to the limitation of access to books, movies, and music. Like if I go to Barnes and Noble and buy a first edition print copy of an author's work, I'm the owner of the book. When I die, I should be able to designate I can designate who's the owner of this book that I own. And why isn't the same transfer of ownership permitted for digital assets, including books, movies, and music?
I
So,
get it. And I agree. It's unfortunate how limiting this licensing model is because we treat digital goods like purchases that are physical, but
yeah.
they're really just subscriptions dressed up as ownership.
Yeah, I guess, and maybe I'm just thinking of it old school. Talking about printed books and going to brick and mortar stores instead of just of using a subscription from Amazon. So
No,
yeah,
believe it or not, I still do it whenever I go to a new city. I'm searching where's the nearest bookstore because I like to see what the offerings are. But coming back to the episode, let's think about how we could work around that. I guess you could keep using the login of that person to like that past to access that content or no?
Yeah, no, I don't know that that would be a sustainable solution in the long term, and it's likely that that would be like a violation of the terms of service.
Yeah.
So when my wife is accessing accounts using my credentials, or if she were, she should be doing that as a temporary thing while she's adjusting to me not being around. It shouldn't be a long term solution. So, and for the books and music, I guess she'll just have to buy them or subscribe to them herself, or keep
Rats.
using her daughter's Spotify account.
Yeah. Well, to a certain extent, I think most of us do something like that anyway. I mean, in my circle of friends and family, subscription sharing is like our own little bartering system. But
Yeah.
let's recap. Since we're getting close to the like preferred time limit here, I'll
Mhm.
summarize what it sounds like we should be doing if we want to guarantee control over our digital life after passing. So number one, set up tools like Google's Inactive Account Manager and Apple's Legacy Contacts. If possible, use a password manager. It's actually encouraged by John. And
Yes.
make sure your loved ones have access. Number three, consider an estate plan that includes your digital assets. And four, actually read the terms of service or find someone who does or ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. That's a great summary. Well done.
Awesome. Thank you for your research on this episode, John. It was super informative, really applicable, well, technically to everyone.
Yeah, agreed. Sure. Anytime. Happy to do it. Do you want to do the disclaimer thing?
You got it. Please know that this information shared throughout the episode is that of our own and not affiliated in any way with our employers or other organizations. These episodes are produced on our own time and are based on our own research and professional opinions.
Okay, thank you for that. And just to leave a tickler for our next episode that's going to come after this one, next time we're going to be unpacking the implications of artificial intelligence on education. So stay tuned for that.
It's massive. And everyone, don't forget to subscribe and even send us your questions about data death and all things privacy in your digital life. We'd love to consider them for episode topics.
Yeah, we would. Thanks, Rachel. And thanks, everyone, for listening. See you next time.
Until next time.